I did notice when I was eating like 100% carnivore, for example, I was craving certain plants.
Health. And none of those people were doing it probably because they don't know. Nobody has ever
Exactly.
told them.
Exactly. You only know what you know. And the reality is that, so something as a chef that I did all the time was I would test things. So I was always like doing 30-day tests. Only if I ate meat, it was raw, or fish,
Hmm.
anything I ate, right? For 30 days. I felt the best I have ever felt in my entire life.
Hmm.
There's a quote he has. He says, we are the only species in the world that looks to someone else to tell us what to eat.
How many people really prepare food at home and have dinner as a family? Speaking of, how did you get into mixing seasonings with organs?
Let's get your audience a discount. What would you like it to be? Actually, let's make it 20. Let's go for it, man. 20%.
All right.
So we'll do that primal shift.
Are you ready to revolutionize your health and reconnect to your primal self? Welcome to the Primal Shift podcast. Before we jump into today's episode, I want to give a big thanks to Lumen for sponsoring the show. Lumen's metabolism tracker is a game changer for anyone serious about optimizing their health. This little device can actually tell you whether your body is burning carbohydrates or fat for fuel at any given moment, giving you real-time insights that go way beyond the old everything in moderation advice. With Lumen, you're taking a more precise, personalized approach to nutrition and fitness that empowers you to make decisions that are right for your body. Check them out at Lumen's website and use the code MK to get 10% off. Start dialing in your metabolism today.
All right, James. Thanks so much for joining me today. I know you're a chef. You do many things, but one of the things that I've found interesting is you're a chef, so you're very much used to making foods taste incredible. And so what I'd like to know from you is, what role have plants as well as organs, which are, on kind of opposite sides of the spectrum, also sometimes from a taste perspective, right? Depending on who you ask. What roles do those two food groups play in your diet, and why?
Yeah, thank you for having me, Michael. Yeah, I've been in the field 20 years as a chef, and I've worked with people trying to lose weight to people that are sick. I've worked with practitioners of all types, from dietitians to naturopaths to doctors to even psychic nutritionists. I mean, I've kind of worked with so many different people in the industry, and it's interesting. I don't necessarily tend to think of it just as like plants or muscle meat or vegan, vegetarian. Like, I don't typically put diets in these categories. I feel like in the 20 years, the thing that has been consistent in my messaging is real food.
Mm-hmm.
That the epidemic, the obesity epidemic, the issues that people are having with their health is so prevalent here in the US. I mean, so much more so than I think anyone truly understands, because, we're all in very specific pods, of health.
Right.
And so we're surrounded by people that are like-minded, that are listening, that are curious, that might have been already on this health path, but the majority of people are not. And they're not.
True.
They don't even know that there's an issue. They're not exposed to different ways of eating. They're very stuck in that sad diet. They're very, like, I've been into towns where the grocery store, what they carry, their main grocery store is no different than a convenience store. It's just, it's all ultra processed foods.
Yeah.
Maybe a banana and an apple, like that. Literally, a banana and apple might be the only real food there, and even that's, a conventional fruit, right? So I just feel like we are the problem is so much bigger than any of us realize, that many of us in these categories are speaking in a vacuum, because we're only speaking to the people that already speak our language.
Yeah.
And that the majority of people, we have to meet them where they are. So my main focus is always like, look, I can't really go into diet too much. What I really can do is just focus on, you're eating ultra processed foods. So let's just move to foods that are an ingredient versus have ingredients.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Right.
find when we just kind of talk in those kind of sound bites that they're able to hear us a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
but but to answer your question though, I would say that over the years I eat primarily carnivore. I do find though when I'm 100% of anything that my body tends to crave certain things,
Right.
and so I try to listen to that. I don't, if I'm craving ice cream, I don't necessarily jump to eat ice cream. I've gotten smarter about that, of course, over the
Mm-hmm.
years. But I did notice when I was eating like 100% carnivore, for example, I was craving certain plants,
Mm-hmm.
and so I eat them,
Right.
or if I crave certain fruits, I'll eat them. But I find for the most part I don't crave that many things. Um, and I am still experimenting to see which plants are causing issues, because I do notice I'll have skin issues sometimes based on some
Yeah.
of the things I eat. And I eat pretty clean, so I'm pretty sure it has to do with the plants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same here. And funny that you say, that we kind of preach to the choir. Coincidentally, last night I watched 30 minutes of TV, and I saw a documentary about a militia, like one of those paramilitary, prepper type of, groups, and think what you want about those type of groups. But what was interesting is that they were clearly focused on preparing for something, be it a natural disaster, be it whatever, Russians are invading, it doesn't really matter. But they're all in rural areas of Georgia, where I am, funny enough, so I kind of thought I want to see this, what they are doing probably up north of where I live. And the one thing that stood out was that they were all out of shape, metabolically unhealthy for sure, just based on how they looked. And when they showed what they were eating for dinner and what they were drinking, I'm like, the number one thing, in my opinion, if you want to be prepared, if you want to, outlive a natural disaster, whatever, you got to be somewhat fit, you got to be healthy, because if all hell breaks loose and suddenly you don't have your insulin injections anymore, you're dead, right?
Yeah.
And so the first thing for me would be, get in shape and take care of your health. And none of those people were doing it, probably because they don't know. Nobody has ever told them,
Exactly. You only know what you know. And the reality is that the word I use for it nowadays is that without contrast. So it's contrast that we need. Without that, why would you change? Because there's nothing inspiring change if you don't have contrast.
Right.
Are you familiar with Philip Mies of Carnivore Bar?
Yes, yeah. Actually, I'm reviewing them right now for a video.
Okay, yeah. So why I bring him up is he's a really great guy, but why I bring him up is so he was in the military,
Mm-hmm.
and he was very frustrated because they get sent out on these long missions, and the food that they were given was all this processed, ultra processed, just unhealthy food.
Mm-hmm.
And that was supposed to sustain them while they were away from their base.
Yeah.
And he got sick,
Mm-hmm.
and overweight, and just was ill. And so when he got out of the military, he was very adamant of like, I'm going to create a bar that is truly healthy and that's
Mm-hmm.
going to sustain soldiers and anyone in the military, and technically anyone even out of the military,
Right.
to for long periods of time. And so he focused on pemmican, which is, you probably know, pemmican is a ancestral way of preserving meat. So
Mm-hmm.
you would take 50% of fat, so usually it's tallow,
Mm-hmm.
and then you take 50% of dried meat protein, and then you blend those together, and you have an old style way of
Right.
preserving that meat.
Yeah.
And they found pemmican that's thousands of years old, so it
Yeah.
really does work.
Yeah.
I think his pemmican bar is one of the reasons, or one of the ways he markets it, is he says they're good for 25 years.
Yeah. And that is good. I love them. They're obviously not inexpensive because making those is not inexpensive, right? I mean, it's at the end of the day, you get the highest quality meat and tallow, and some salt or whatever flavors, there are different flavors available, but it's a high quality product. And it's shelf stable, so if you really want to be prepared and stock your pantry or your basement with food, make it something like that, and you'll be good to go.
I think that's an interesting topic, like the cost of food, right? And I think it's interesting for you and I to talk about it, since we're both promoting organ meats, and we're promoting freeze dried powdered organ meats, which
Hmm.
increase the price of an organ meat incredibly.
Yeah.
Like I find it really fascinating, because that is the thing, of course, that comes up, right? Is food costs, which
Hmm.
have obviously increased. And I know that Philip deals with this all the time, of like people saying like, "Oh, your bars are so expensive." And I'm sure you get that with your products as well, and I get that with mine as well. And it's like it's an interesting topic, because there's on one side it's like, yeah, do you have to be wealthy to be healthy, right? There's that kind
Yeah.
of
Right.
conversation. But then the other side of that coin is, well, what is the true cost of food?
Correct.
And the perception is very uh, just warped because of the subsidizing that's happening by the U.S.
Hmm.
government, right?
Correct.
So that you know, and it's been happening for since. I mean, actually, I don't even know how long they've been subsidized. I think since before the '60s, but I could be wrong. But I do know that, for example, a 10-cent hamburger back in the day, and what even when I was growing up, they were, I think, 49 to 69 cents, and now they're maybe a dollar or something. But either way, that is not the true cost of a hamburger,
Right. Yeah.
right? I mean, we know that it's not the true cost, and yet that's the perception everyone has of how much meat should cost, when people don't really realize that you're actually paying more than that, but you're
Hmm.
paying that through your taxes, because your
Right.
taxes are subsidizing the industry, and so you don't realize it, but you're paying a lot more than what you are at the grocery store.
Yeah. Of course, the problem is, just because I stop purchasing subsidized food doesn't make the good food any cheaper, right? At least
Exactly.
not unless we all do that, and we stop subsidizing altogether, and we keep more of our tax dollars, and we can choose how to spend it, right? But at the same time, I also think that food budgets are not really where they should be. That's one thing well, and that is us included. And we tend to spend money on things that are significantly less important for overall health than food, right? Be it, cars and, gadgets and I don't know what. Um,
Yeah.
and also, I think people don't truly understand what it really costs to produce good food. And we've only realized that when we started, growing some of our own food. And, we're eating likely some of the most expensive eggs we can we can have, simply because we choose to purchase the most expensive type of feed for our chickens that has no vegetable oils, no seed oils, soy, corn free, organic, all the checks all the marks basically. But that's very expensive, as opposed to feeding just regular corn, soy, type of feed with seed oil binders, that changes the fatty acid composition in the bird, and then eventually also in the egg.
Chickens are a perfect example, because I mean, people don't even realize how much protein chickens eat and need,
Mm.
and it's incredibly expensive to raise a chicken properly.
Yeah.
And what we see in the grocery stores, from eggs to carcass or to the bird, is completely inaccurate. I mean, completely. So
Mm.
yeah, I hear you. It's when you do it right, it's still not necessarily cheaper, but I have to think though that you probably don't need to eat as much. Would you find that to be true? Like when you're eating food that is, well, like, very nutrient dense,
Hmm.
um, raised properly, because which makes supports it being nutrient dense,
Right.
you get satiated through less. Whereas, when you're eating, a lot of people that are eating ultra processed foods, they eat a lot more of that food because their body's looking for that nutrition. I mean,
Right.
at least like I'll give an example. Like when I was, so something as a chef that I did all the time was I would test things. So I was always like doing 30-day tests. So
Hmm.
I did like any diet that's ever come out, I would do it on for 30 days because I had to know not only how it felt eating it, but I had to know how to cook it well. Like I had to,
Right.
because I was a private chef for people that were doing those diets, so I had to understand the diet, backwards and forwards. And so I did this one diet that's basically called Primal Raw. So
Hmm.
I was everything I ate was raw, and I'm not talking raw vegetables. I'm talking meat.
Right.
Everything I ate.
Hmm.
So if I had cheese, it was raw. If I had milk, it was raw. And more importantly, if I ate meat, it was raw or fish.
Hmm.
Anything I ate, right? For 30 days, I felt the best I have ever felt in my entire life,
Hmm.
and I ate less
Hmm.
because when we cook meat, we degrade it, right?
Right.
Like the nutrients lower, but when it's raw, you get everything,
Hmm.
and it was phenomenal. The biggest issue, because then obviously anyone listening is going, well, why aren't you still eating that way, right? That's the obvious question, and it's because it wasn't realistic. Like we had just had our first child, and it was like you can't necessarily feed a child raw stuff because if there's any,
Right.
their immune systems aren't
Hmm.
developed yet, they could get sick. Um, Also, we didn't necessarily have a lot of friends eating that way, so we wouldn't have been able to be social with people
Hmm.
unless we brought our own food. Like there's an aspect of kind of, I think everyone listening, I imagine you go through this
Yeah.
too. We're constantly balancing like how do
Hmm.
we survive in this world, the modern world, but yet find our definition or live
Right.
the health that we believe is right for us.
Absolutely. Yeah. And
And
it's,
it's
it's ever changing, right? And
it's
that,
ever changing,
that
and it's challenging. It's
yeah.
no doubt it's challenging. Do you know Dr. Bill Schindler?
Hmm. Yeah.
Like a human.
Oh yeah.
Bill, I love Bill. He's a friend of mine, and there's a quote he has. He says, "We are the only species in the world that looks to someone else to tell us what to eat."
Yeah.
And on a certain level, it's like, oh, that's a little scary, but it gets even scarier when you realize there's over 8 million species on this planet,
Hmm.
and we're the only one that's like, hello, could you tell me what I should eat? Because I don't remember, I don't know. We're
Hmm.
so out of touch with our food,
Yeah.
um, our food industry. We're also so out of touch with just listening to our bodies that most people are kind of stuck, and so that's one thing I'm really always trying to promote is like how do we, okay, it's going to be pretty impossible to get back to our ancestral knowledge
Right.
of what we want to eat because our ancestors didn't have the marketing machines that we have. They didn't have the hybridized food. They didn't have all the things that we're dealing with. But I do believe we can get closer.
Hmm.
But to do that, we have to do a few things. We have to slow down when we're eating. We have to like
Hmm.
be mindful when we're eating, make mindful choices, and actually be mindful as we're eating the food, like chewing and breathing, and taking the
Yeah.
time to actually like assimilate the food. And then we have to eat the food. We can't just, so many people are scarfing things down and they're just like, they're either swallowing tons of pills or they're just rushing through the food and they're waiting too long to eat and they're making bad decisions. They're not being mindful. They're making addictive decisions, like where you're so depleted that you
Right.
look for the starchy, high carb food or high sugary food because your body's so itchy for some energy, right? Or some carbs.
Well, let me ask you this because that's something we've noticed, both my wife and I. It's like one of those things that drives us nuts is when we sit down as a family for dinner, and there are, let's say, there is steak on the table, or there are patties, or there are sweet plantains that we like to make from a fruit perspective. And our kids sit down, and as soon as that bowl of patties or whatever is on the table, they it's almost like who can get the most food on their plate first because it's gonna be gone soon. And it's with good food. It's not that we are putting nachos or whatever on the table. So it's meat. It's one ingredient type of foods. as you said before. But I'm like, kids, slow down, enjoy your food, chew it, and and don't just rush it and wash it down with with some raw milk or whatever. That's not the purpose. And then I'm like looking in nature. I'm like, if you see a pack of wolves or a hyena or whatever, killing a prey, they go to town too. And I'm like, well, I'm trying to tell them to slow down and enjoy their food, but if you look at nature, the exact opposite is happening. What is your take on that?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I haven't actually thought about how that is in nature, but my first thought is that, well, in nature they're not eating as much as we do, right? So when they
Right.
go to eat, they're truly hungry.
Right. True.
When we go to eat, I think it's a lot of times it's behavioral. It's
Hmm.
learned. We've learned to do it that way. And just like the person that's constantly in fight or flight, they have to learn to meditate. They have to learn to slow down.
Hmm.
We have to do that in the kitchen as well, or at the dinner table.
Right.
A couple of ideas that I would have though to slow it down is a lot of times when we're kind of stuck in a rut, or I say rut, that's probably the wrong word, but a pattern. When we're
Hmm.
stuck in a pattern, it's usually connected to texture of the food, connected to flavor, and it just kind of in general. This is the same thing as flavor, but it's kind of tied to our palate as well. So most of Americans, for example, are tied to the salty sweet
Hmm.
of their taste buds, right?
Right.
So we have salty, sweet, bitter, sour, umami, and they think there's even a sixth one that has to do with rancid food, or like when food's gone bad, that has its own flavor as well.
Hmm.
And the four that we all mostly go to school learning is the salt, sweet, bitter, sour. And I find that most kids, when they're picky, and obviously yours aren't, but when most kids are picky, it's because they're stuck in the salty sweet. So the way to encourage them to start being more adventurous is not to be hard on them, to shame them, to kind of do that kind of thing where it's like you can't leave the table to eat this food no matter what it
Right.
is. That it's actually you can get there through the palate. That you
Hmm.
just have to start introducing those other flavors, but you don't have to introduce them in huge amounts. You can treat it kind of like a pet when you're trying to introduce new food to a pet. You Anyone that's done it knows if you go too fast, the pet will get diarrhea or something, like they'll have
Hmm.
issues, digestive issues. And so what you do is you do a little bit of the new food and mostly the old food, and then you slowly mess with those ratios over time, but gradually. And you do the same with kids. Is
Hmm.
like you can mix, for example, sauerkraut juice, which is sour. So you can take
Right.
fermented vegetables, take the juice from that fermented vegetables, and slowly add a little bit of that to the ground meat or to the
Hmm.
sauce that they're putting on there, whatever it is, and their palate will start to open up and they'll start to
Interesting.
get more adventurous. So that's what most people could do with their kids. But in terms of like ideas for your kids to slow down, I would focus on, well, do you guys already, before you start eating, do you do like a grace or a prayer or just some kind of take a breath before you actually start eating?
What we started doing is, showing, expressing gratefulness,
Gratitude. Yeah,
gratitude,
gratitude. Yeah.
right? To kind of say, okay, hey, mom cooked this food. We're very fortunate that we have that, kind of help them understand that this is not something that everyone has, right? And
Yeah.
that we are grateful for that. So that's, I guess, what we
And that's
started
great.
doing.
That's a great thing. But you could even extend, I don't know how you're doing it, but one thing you could do is you could be like, let's go around the table and everyone just say one grace, one thing that they're
Hmm.
grateful for,
Right.
whether it's about the meal or even their day. And so just to get people out of that, right away, you're at the table, and even though your instinct or the way you've been socialized is to go towards the food, but by getting them to use I think it's the left brain. So our right brain is kind of more
Hmm.
like, give me that food.
Right.
But the left, I'm not sure which side of the brain, but whatever, you get them to transfer their energy towards thinking about their day, or thinking outside of their hunger. So that's one way. But another way that a lot of people don't actually think about is you if you change the texture of what you're serving, it will force people to go slower. So let's just say
Hmm.
if you're always serving ground meat, that's very easy to eat because there's no bones, there's nothing
Right.
to work around, right? You just boom, 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 boom.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want the child to slow down, serve that meat with bone.
Mm-hmm.
Serve it in a different capacity
Mm-hmm.
than they're used to. Maybe it's a braised stew. And so they actually have to hunt for the meat a little bit more because it's so
Right.
liquidy and it's falling
Uh-huh.
apart. But the minute you change the texture and the method of delivery, they'll have to slow. You force them to slow down.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's other ones that are probably more obvious and more talked about, which is you require that every time you take a bite, you have to put your fork down.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
Very simple.
Yeah. And we have introduced, obviously, I'm a huge fan of tough meats, tough to chew meats, with the bone,
Yep.
to work out and exercise your jaw muscles and everything.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing we have we do quite a bit, to simply serve something that requires a lot of chewing.
Yep.
Not necessarily for that reason, but that's I didn't think about that, but more so from a jaw muscle exercise perspective. But yeah, that's a and putting the fork down. I actually had not heard about that. So that's
Oh, okay. Yeah.
that's an
That
interesting idea.
that's a good one. And I mean, back in I think it was in the 70s, there was a whole movement of chewing,
Mm-hmm.
and they used to have, I cannot remember the name. There was a name for it. But there used to be people would eat at these tables and it'd be silent because they wouldn't allow people to talk. And
Right.
they had a minimum amount of times they had to chew the food.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was kind of crazy. Like it was like 60 times, it's like
Yeah.
you had to literally chew and chew. And so that's why people never talked. But I don't
Uh-huh.
know. I mean, once again, I think it all goes back to not only your definition of health, but
Mm-hmm.
also what are you able to sustain? Because,
Right.
anyone can introduce an idea to us and we could do it for a day, a week, maybe even a month,
Mm-hmm.
maybe. But I personally have no interest in that. Like, I want to know
Right.
what's the thing I'm going to do for a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm
Correct.
looking for little movements that I can do daily, little
Mm-hmm.
health movements that I can do daily. Because when we're extreme, it's just not sustainable.
Yeah. No, I
At least in
totally
my
agree.
judgment.
No, it's absolutely true, and it's the same with dieting. I'm any 30-day whatever. I mean, you did it for obvious reasons, but someone saying, "Oh, I'm going to do a 30-day reset and then I go back to how I ate before," absolutely
What's the point?
useless. Yeah, what's the
What's the
point?
point?
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and funny, the waiting before you start eating kind of thing. Funny enough, we've been doing this with our dog, with German Shepherd, and he's on a raw meat diet. And we train him from the beginning that he can only start eating once we give him the okay, right? And now it's become so, and once he had that down, we were a little, less, more lenient with that. But he still has that ingrained. So whenever we put the football down, and we don't tell him free, he would just sit there. And sometimes we would forget, we put the food down, walk away, do something else in the kitchen or whatever. And like 10 minutes later, we hear like the dog make a noise. And I'm like, what is it? And he's still sitting in front of his bowl,
Oh
waiting,
my gosh.
waiting for the release word.
Now you just have to train your kids with a release word, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
If a German Shepherd can learn it, a human should be able to.
Yeah, Pavlov's dogs, right? Yeah. What another thing that gosh, what's another thing that we do at home? Well, one thing we do at our house is we will we'll sit there and kind of do this round robin of just gratitude.
Mhm.
But then once we start eating, we also will start. Typically, we'll ask questions like, "So, what was 3 things in your day that you're really happy about?"
Right.
Or something. We'll encourage some dialogue that shifts them. Everyone, like I said, to a different part of their brain.
Mhm.
And of course, it's a great way to connect as a family at that time.
Yeah.
But I just find there's ways to kind of get people out of these routines or these cycles, and it doesn't have to be serious. It doesn't have to be like I said earlier, shaming, but that you
Right.
can even do it with humor and joy. And so I'm a big fan of using that table time with the family as a real point of connection.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think there was even some study back in the day where they were showing all these people that were successful, and I don't think success necessarily meant financial. I think they were just well balanced people, but who had very high level jobs, and every single one of them, the only similarity they all had was that they all ate dinners with their parents. Like there were family dinners.
Mm-hmm. And that's another thing. I mean, talking or going back to what you said initially about, most people not knowing, and, most people are, unhealthy and don't know any better. And how many people really prepare food at home and have dinner as a family,
Absolutely.
Not that many.
It's a major issue. Yeah, it's a major issue. And I would offer that anyone listening that's struggling with that, one of the easiest health tools that we have available to us that is very underutilized is meal planning. It's something that is so simple. You grab a recipe magazine, you grab a cookbook, doesn't matter which one, just pick one from your shelf, go to the library, rent one, bring it home, and then you all sit down, you pick 5 recipes, 5 or 6 of those recipes for the week. Just focus on dinners, and then from there you make a grocery list based on those recipes. You make sure to make double the recipes, so then that way that's also the next day's lunch.
Right.
And then breakfast, just keep to 1 to 3 things. I mean, keep it simple for breakfast. Eggs, steak, whatever, eggs, whatever you do for breakfast. Just, you could eat the same thing every day. I don't care. Keep it simple. But then, put your effort in those dinners. And what's amazing is that you don't make emotional purchases when you go to the grocery store, because you have a list. And then you plan your meal plan around your schedules. Don't just willy-nilly go like, oh, well, let's just have this today and that tomorrow. Because if you look at your work schedule and you have a day where it's like you're working all the way up to, dinner time, clearly that's not a day to do a complicated meal. Right. So that would be a day I would do like a slow cook meal or a pressure cook meal where you can start it in the morning and it's ready for you when you're ready. Yeah. So you want to use your emotional intelligence when you're planning, meal planning. But I'm telling you, it is the most. It will truly change your entire week, and it's completely underutilized by people.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And funny enough, both my wife and I are home all day. We homeschool the kids, so we're all at home really all day. And even so, and we make every meal, from scratch. We eat twice a day, breakfast or. Well, we break our fast at some point during the day, and then we have dinner. And even so, we found that planning ahead is incredibly useful and beneficial and saves you a lot of time and decision making, because we all have to make so many decisions throughout the day. The fewer decisions I have to make because I already know what's going to happen, I think the more smoother sailing it is for the remainder of the day. And in particular, if there are kids involved who, everyone has different tastes and preferences, but if you get together, on a Sunday and say, hey, okay, what is it you guys want to eat? Here are your options, pick your favorite meals and I'll make sure we'll incorporate them, it's huge.
Now, what time do you guys normally eat?
We try to have dinner around 5, between 4 and 6, I want to say. Sometimes it's a little earlier, sometimes it's a little later, but between...
I was going to suggest that because I've noticed that when we have dinner, I noticed that my kids are hungry at 4:30. And so that's one thing I always recommend to people is like, I know we all have this idea of like when dinner is supposed to be served. For some people it's 7, some is 6, some are 5, right? But what I suggest is instead of coming in with this hard rule of when, notice, particularly if you have kids, notice when are the kids the most hungry?
Right.
Because most likely what's happening for those 7 people that are eating really late, what's happening, I would almost guarantee it, is that the kids are hungry at that 4 or 4:30 time. They're eating a snack.
Yeah.
And then they're not hungry at 5 or 5:30 or 6. And then that's why you're eating at 7. But if you just feed kids at 4:30 or whatever that time is, like you said, maybe 4 even, you find that not only do they eat their entire meal, but they don't need food later that night.
Yeah.
Right? They're not craving other foods. So it's really I think I'm always trying to listen. You know what I mean? I'm always trying to not just go into any situation assuming things, but really just listening and seeing, well, what, and obviously those habits are going to change based on the season as well, right?
Yeah.
Because just like our cravings for certain foods change with the season, so does when we want to eat, what we
Absolutely.
want to eat,
Yeah.
obviously. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one thing, we've noticed it that modern life very often kind of dictates when you can eat, and that often does not align with when you're hungry, right? And so we've noticed this in particular with our kids when they were still in school. They had to get up at 6, and then have breakfast before leaving for school. At that time, our 10-year-old, almost 11-year-old now, she typically is not hungry until we eat around 10 or 11. That's when she breaks her fast. Not because we told her that fasting is good, because that's when she gets hungry, and that's when she eats. Our younger one, on the other hand, she can eat relatively quickly after waking up because he feels hungry. And so that would have been impossible to implement if they were still at school, right? Because either they eat at home or they have to deal with, they bring stuff, but they can only eat when there is their lunch break or what have you. They cannot just unpack their lunchbox at 10 in the middle of classes. And so that was really interesting, and that has obviously then also shifted when we have dinner. And now that we have, fortunately, flexibility, our whole eating and also our sleeping routine has completely changed and is more based on what we need versus what society tells us we have to do at a given point.
that's fantastic. Now, when did you start homeschooling? So it sounds like they used to go to the city school.
Yeah, they used to go to public school. We took them out 2 years ago.
Okay. And so
Yeah.
what is some obvious things that you've seen change from that?
Mostly our daughter's sleep schedule. She is one who goes to bed at with everyone else at a reasonable time, usually between 7 and 8, but she doesn't fall asleep until 9. And when she was still at school, having to get up at 6, and she was younger too, where she required even more sleep, that was very difficult for her, because she had to get up before she was ready, and so that's one thing we've noticed, that her energy levels and her whole demeanor really throughout the day has dramatically improved by just getting enough sleep, and not being sleep deprived all the time. The other thing we've noticed is that our little one, that was probably the most fascinating discovery at all. We never taught him formally, how to read, because, my wife's Costa Rican. She speaks Spanish with the kids. I'm from Austria, so I speak German. And obviously, we have the English because we live in the US. And so we raised them with those 3 languages. And they got some English reading, obviously, in school. But our little one started reading in German and in Spanish without anyone formally teaching him, just by, I don't know, listening to his older sister, or by, I don't know, listening to us read to him and figuring out how the words are supposed to sound, or whatever the case might be. He started reading in 2 more languages without formal instructions. And I'm like, so evidently, kids learn if you just let them. And the learning pace and what they are learning might not always be what you think they should be doing, or how quickly they should be doing certain things at a certain age. But nonetheless, they learn every day by just doing what they are doing. And we follow, we unschool, so we don't have a curriculum. The only thing that we, I guess, enforce, if you will, is math. I think you need to be able to count, you need to be able to read, to find the information that you need, that you have not learned yet. And so, but everything else is pretty much child-led, and they are progressing, differently. There are certain things that our daughter is incredibly good at. There are certain things our son is incredibly good at, where they are ahead of the curve. In some areas they are behind the curve, but at the end of the day, at some point they know what they need to know to be successful by just, being exposed all the time to all the opportunities and all the information they need. It's just a matter of when are they interested in certain things, and then you want to, obviously enforce and encourage that. But don't freak out about, stuff that they might not be super interested in at the time.
But did you know how they came up with the academic system in terms of like what they teach at 12th grade and what they teach in third grade? And all, so basically what they did was they took what do you need to know in college. So by when you actually go to college, what are the criteria that you need to be there? And then they just went backwards. And so it has nothing to do with what is the child actually developed to learn at that age. Has nothing to do with it. It's and I think that's the biggest mistake the American school system has done is that we're not basing it on optimal ages for kids to learn. I mean, most people learn math way better when they're older versus younger.
I was about to say, I recently, 2 years ago, I had to build a chicken coop, right? And so I had to get, the angles of the roof and everything right. And I'm like, I remember at some point in my, in school, I knew how to calculate, the angles. If you know one side and one angle, you can, calculate the rest. But of course, I don't remember that formula, But I went and looked it up, and now I just looked at it. I'm like, yeah, it makes total sense. This is how it works. Back in the days, I was struggling, understanding and memorizing all of that stuff that I then didn't need for 30 plus years. But now that I'm older and my brain is more developed, I look at some of the things that appeared incredibly complex back then, and they just make sense because my brain is, has the capacity of figuring it out, right? And it's
amazing. Yeah. It's amazing. I same thing for me. I struggled with math when I was younger, and then in my early 20s, I was a substitute teacher, and I happened to get put in math classes sometimes, and I would have to teach them these things, and I remember I would look at their work that they were doing, and I'm like, oh my, like it suddenly just all made sense to me in my 20s, but I struggled to do it when I was their age, when I was in my teens, and so. Absolutely. Yeah. It's so specific to development and really, there have been studies, they were basing intelligence off of creativity. And so on a certain level, everyone is intelligent, when they're first born up to a certain age. And then they showed how once formal school started, how their definition of intelligence started to go down because kids became less and less creative.
Right.
And what happens as well, as we all know, and what so many people are struggling with now, is we also become less joyful.
Right.
Right. And so I really do think, I imagine one of the things you're either are starting to see and or will see is your children are going to be more creative and hopefully more joyful. By the unschooling you're doing. So kudos to you and your wife.
Yeah.
Now, slight change of subject, but I have to admit I'm a little curious about this. What we both chose in this health industry to really focus in on organ meats.
Yeah.
So what brought you to organ meats?
Yeah. Good question. Yeah. At some point, I realized that, we gotta eat, the whole animal, and not just the ribeye, right? And that really, and then I talked to, my mom and, my grandmother who's still alive, she's now 92, and see what, the foods that they used to eat and how they used to cook, and I'm like, well, and she's 92 and healthy, so I'm like, evidently they did something different, and then looking even further back, in human history, and seeing what, how modern, hunter-gatherer tribes, what they eat and how animals eat in the wild, be it wolves or what have you, they all eat the organs. And then, looking more into the nutritional aspects, I figured, well, those are really the true, superfoods and multivitamins that we have access to and that we should be eating. And that really started, the conversation in our family and how we can incorporate, organ meats, be it, hiding them in meatballs and whatnot. And at some point, I discovered freeze-dried beef organ supplements, and we started buying them, from some of our friendly competitors. And then my wife said, you know what? you really, in addition to all of the, digital content that you put out, I think it would be good to have a physical product. And I'm like, well, as part of my blogging, I test and review and try so many different products. And usually I take them for a while and then I stop. But there is this one thing that I could consider myself using for the rest of my life. And that's organs, organ meat supplements in particular, because of the convenience,
Do you notice did you notice a difference when you started it? Did you guys already have your kids by then, or?
Yes. Yeah. No, we already had.
Did you notice a change in your health or theirs?
Not in mine, because at that time I was already eating fresh organs on a regular basis. So I couldn't really tell that I felt significantly better or different. But in my family, especially in my extended family, the ones that are, kind of, getting inspired by what we do and then trying to implement some of those changes in their own life. My best example is my brother-in-law. The other day, he said, you know what, beef organs, that organ mix, my energy levels are significantly different. And I'm like, you don't have to tell me stuff, there is nothing to gain for you by telling me that if it's not true. I'm like, no, I'm dead serious. If I take those beef organs, my energy levels are significantly better. If I don't, I have fluctuating energy levels, even though, and they've been trying to do a lot of things better, so they're on the right path already. And so I think at some point that'll probably level off and they, get what they need from, the regular food that I eat. But according to him, it's made a significant difference, likely because he was deficient maybe in iron or B12 or, some of those other micronutrients that are responsible for, energy production in the mitochondria. And I hear that from a lot of people, friends and family. And I'm like, I kind of wish almost I was still on the standard American diet when I started, taking those supplements, because I wish I would have firsthand experience and can say, yes, I felt that too, because I did not. But one thing I obviously noticed, and with the kids and really, our the core of our family here, we are barely ever sick. We are thriving, so whatever is that we are doing seems to be working. What role the organ meats, play, it's hard to tell, but I like to think I take them every day simply because, there are always little gaps. My diet isn't perfect. Our kids' diet isn't perfect. There are environmental factors. There are, elevated stress levels that we are not supposed to be, exposed to, but we are anyway. There are, environmental toxins. There are so many things around us that kind of, that we have to fight against from an immunity perspective. I just want to cover my base and say, okay, I'm going to provide my body with all the micronutrients it needs. It'll take what it needs and discard the rest. That's kind of how I see it.
Isn't it interesting? You made a comment even when you were sharing this about, you friendly, like that you originally were ordering your organ meat supplements from friendly businesses, businesses that you don't see as competitors, but as friends and allies, right?
Right.
And isn't that interesting now? I'm wondering if this is your experience kind of in this community of, I don't know what you would even call the community we're part of, whether it's meat eating or whole animal community. But isn't it interesting how my experience of it is that none of us are competitive. We're all just trying to raise the ship for everybody. It's like, we're just trying to promote whole animal. Like, so however you do that, we're all winning.
Right. Exactly.
People I talk to, that's what they say. And you're clearly like that. I just find most industry is not like this, where everyone's rooting for each other, because it's more about the mission than it is about an individual.
Yeah. And, absolutely true. And, it's, the thing is, we are such a niche, there's such a huge population that can benefit from eating better, right? I don't see in my lifetime that will exploit that entire market, and are saturated because everyone is eating organs. I don't think that will ever happen. And so it's also, I think, relatively easy to be, more laid back, because it's not cutthroat. It doesn't have to be. There is so many, customers out there who can benefit from our products. And if they win, we win. It's like a win-win, and it's fun, to play in in that pond and kind of help everyone out, because there are so many people who come to me who tried something else, and then they're trying mine, and then I might and also I think we also kind of inspire each other a little bit. For example, I just the other day I saw that Heart and Soil has launched a new animal-based product, and they came up, the packaging, they use like a cardboard kind of a tub, right? And I'm like, this is ingenious, because when we launched our collagen and colostrum, I'm like, I can't do it in glass, which all of our supplements are in glass, but this one, it's just too heavy, breakage and cost of shipping. Nobody would be able to buy it because it's too expensive. And I didn't even know there is such a thing as a cardboard, tub that I could use that would hold the powder, for 2 years without spoiling. And I'm like, that's ingenious. They did it. Now I'm going to copy it, not because, I'm a copycat, but I think because it's a great idea. And I like to think that maybe in some other cases, people copy it from us, and, we all, produce better products and hopefully help more people get healthy. So I think it's awesome.
Yeah, that's really inspiring. I'm that's something I've been. Well, packaging is always an issue. Like,
yeah,
I've been in the packaging industry in a sense since 2007, when I started my meal delivery service. Now I don't own that anymore, but even then, packaging was a huge issue, because what I wanted didn't exist.
Yeah.
And to this day, I'm constantly always looking for the most eco-friendly packaging. But even like, as you probably, you just mentioned this, a lot of people, when they think about packaging, particularly businesses, they don't always think about the many touch points.
Yeah.
So when you're a direct-to-consumer business, you have to think about, okay, if it's heavy, then that means I'm using more fossil fuels to not only ship it to my co-packer, but also to ship it out to my customers.
Right.
There's breakage, as you mentioned. So if it's something that can break, you got to wrap it in more stuff, more fossil fuels there too.
Yeah.
And then if it does break, you got to ship it again. And that's, and so all these things contribute to not being very planet focused or pro planet. And so I'm always trying to think about, well, how can what's the the path of least resistance, and but where I'm still walking my talk around, planet, profit, people, the 3 Ps. And like, one thing we're trying to do is we're going to move from our bags to shakers, and I've been looking for a shaker that fits, and I think I'm going to be going with a craft paper shaker. And that's foil lined, so it's still recyclable. It's not there's not a concern of leaching for the foil, because it's not a hot product,
Right.
It's not that you're not cooking in it, anything like that.
Right.
And we're gonna give it a test, because I think it's gonna, it's not gonna be glass. It's not gonna look the way that most seasonings do on the market, but I don't know. Well, I'm curious to see how people respond to it. We're in the process of getting it out there now. But I'm hoping that the story behind why we're choosing what we're choosing resonates with people, because I just think this is going to be way better for not only the fossil fuel use of direct to consumer, but also the end use, in terms of that you can just simply recycle it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Speaking of, how did you get into mixing seasonings with organs?
Yeah.
How did that come about?
I am happy to report I'm the first to do it. And anyone out there that tries to say that that's not true, I will challenge them, because that was why I did it, is because I was, I've been a chef, as I mentioned, for a long time, and I've had ideas over the years. I had an idea for fermented condiments way back in the day, like where you're taking ketchups and they're fermented, so they're actually supporting your health versus just adding sugar to your diet. I had an idea for concentrated bone broths before anyone was doing it, where you just simply add water and then that creates the bone broth, so almost like a Keurig kind of bone broth.
Right.
And I couldn't, at the time when I had those ideas, I had my meal delivery service, so I couldn't pivot. I was so swallowed by that business. That business was so overwhelming because I had built it incorrectly. I had not built it. I built it as though I was private chefing for 100 or more people, which is not scalable.
Right.
And so I made a big mistake when I started that. I tried to take my private chef sensibilities and support everyone in that way, and it's just not scalable. So as we got bigger, it got crazier and crazier, and we tried to pivot, and it was just like, it was a real bear. And so when I sold that business and I was, had some time to get my creativity back, that's when I got the idea of Pluck and taking those freeze-dried desiccated organs that we already knew existed and combining them with shelf-stable dried spices and herbs and making a shelf-stable seasoning that's not only flavorful but is functional, is actually supporting your health. When I got that idea, I just was like, I can't let this one go, because if I don't do this, someone else is going to come up with it. And so I jumped on it, and we're now in our 4th year. And I love it. Constantly surprises me. I'm constantly in awe of it, because there's so many things, and I'm sure you get this as well. Like you have an idea when you start a business, what your mission or what you're trying to do. But the more people it reaches, you learn that there are new things that people gain from it, or there are new ways that you're supporting someone's health that you never even conceived.
Right.
It just becomes much more fuller than you ever could imagine. And that's definitely been my experience. But it mostly came around having kids. So when I had my daughters, they both got sick pretty young. My oldest is 4 years older than my youngest. But we were traveling to Canada when my youngest was, I think, around 1.5 or 2. And they got Shiga toxin, which is a form of E. coli. And it's very deadly for very young kids, and it's deadly for the elderly as well. And my oldest daughter got through it pretty quick, like within 3 days. And my youngest daughter, though, it just held on, and she couldn't keep anything down. And I think it was like finally the 8th or 9th day, and she was skin and bones. I mean, she was already a very lean child, but she was skin and bones. It was really scary. And I just remember thinking, she suddenly was able to finally hold down some toast. And, here we are, people who care about health. And I'm like, oh man, my kids get addicted to toast because that's all she'll eat.
Right. And
I just was looking at that toast, and I was going like, gosh, I wish there was something I could put on there that would just make it healthier. Like something I could just sprinkle on or something. And that's where the idea for, well, that's kind of put me down the rabbit hole of like, well, what's the most nutrient-dense food? It's organ meats.
Right.
And how can I make, but obviously there's 3 main hurdles with organ meats. There's the people think they're gross. They don't know how to cook them, and they don't know how to source them.
Yeah.
And so we have means of getting them the way your company is, and a few others, like where you get the encapsulated powdered organ meats and you swallow them, right? But a lot of kids can't necessarily do that, and it's also, we do run into issues sometimes with any supplement, which is you get supplement fatigue. You just kind of go in and out.
Right.
Sometimes you're consistent, sometimes you're not consistent. So as a chef, I was like, well, how do I, it's no different than what we've already talked about with, like, how do I support health, but remove those hindrances, remove those issues, those human qualities of inconsistency. And that's when I was like, well, we already season our food. This is something we do every day, multiple times a day. So if I can just turn it into something that we do daily, then it becomes an autopilot, something now anyone could do. There's still obviously a place for taking capsules, because my product, well, at least we have 4 products. So we have 3 that have seasonings, and then also have Redmond real salt. So we have 3 that have salt and seasonings and herbs. They all have the organ blend, the liver, heart, kidney, spleen, pancreas. But then the 4th one is just the organ meats. So that's comparable to your capsules. And so we were just trying to cover all of them, but there's still, of course, a place, like when someone just wants to be done with it, doesn't want to think about it, capsules are great. You swallow your capsule, you're done. If you've been tested and you know that you're anemic, you know that there's something going on, the capsules or our pure bag are the way to go, because then you're getting 100% of that
Mm-hmm.
organ meat, and you can, you can really modulate it based on your need, right?
Right.
The seasoning ones, how I look at those ones is they're really just gateways. So
Mm-hmm.
anyone that comes to either of us and is like, oh, organ meats, I can't, they're so resistant.
Mm-hmm.
To me, Pluck is like, it's just a gateway. It's just like,
Right.
okay, if organ meats are the gateway to nutritional abundance, then the seasonings are just a gateway to the organs,
Right.
because they don't taste, it doesn't taste like organs.
Right.
And it's not in a form. It's not a wet organ. You're not thinking about, like, when you sprinkle it on there, you don't even think about it being an animal organ, right? So we're messing with your perception of what organs are. You don't even have to cook it. So we're messing with that concept.
Mm-hmm.
So it just makes it so easy to assimilate. And then because you're eating it, it's exactly what I talked about earlier. You're shifting your palate,
Right.
to then hopefully be someone like yourself who actually cooks organs. So like the goal is you start one place, but then you get to a place where maybe you're cooking them yourself and eating them. And to me, if we can get people there, then we're all winning.
Yeah.
Because not only is it, because the reality is like both of our products are going to be more expensive because they're freeze dried. But if we get people to eat organs before they're freeze dried, then now we're truly making organs. We're making health
Right.
doable for anyone's pocketbook. Because organs, I'm always pointing this out to people. Like if you're someone who looks at eating meat and you're like, oh, it's so expensive, right? And you're looking at that ribeye is $24 a pound, right? Well, the same 100% grass-fed cow has a tongue, has a liver, has a heart, has some kidneys, right? It's like, and these parts of that animal are not $24 a pound. They're sometimes $3 to $4 to $7 a pound. I mean, incredibly less cost. So anyone that's kind of complaining that, well, this animal-based diet or eating meat is too expensive, I'm just like, well, eat the organs. And if you want, start with the ones that are closest to muscle meat. Start with either the heart or with the tongue.
Yeah, the tongue is, I think, the most delicious part of the animal, as far as I'm concerned. The kids love it. I remember the first time we cooked tongue, they're like, "This is the best meat we've ever had." I'm like, "Well, it was tongue."
It's more delicious. So it's got more flavor. It's more delicious. It's more nutritious, and it's cheaper.
Yeah.
Like,
it's a win-win-win.
Yeah, it's like, why aren't more people doing it?
Yeah, probably because preparation and peeling it and stuff, people see that, they're probably turned off. But once you're past that and put it in the slow cooker, maybe with some tomato sauce or whatever, can't beat tongue.
No, it's so good, and it shows up in many other cultures. I mean, in Mexico, it's lengua, and it's anytime you go to an authentic taco place, they're gonna have lengua. It's a staple in Mexican cuisine, and it's delicious. And once you, as you said, once you learn how to cook it, it's not hard at all.
Yeah,
it's very, very easy.
All right. Well, we're on the top of the hour. I much appreciate it. A lot of good information. If there is any discount codes, links, what have you, I know you sent me already a bunch of stuff in the sign up or the intake form, but anything else you want to mention that I can put in the show notes or even overlay in the final edit, then let me know.
Yeah, well, let's get your audience discount. What would you like it to be?
If you could make it Primal Shift.
Primal Shift. And that will be a 15% discount.
Awesome. All right, perfect.
Actually, let's make it 20. Let's go for it, man. 20%.
All right.
So we'll do that Primal Shift, and that will be 20% off. And that will be all we'll have that. Do you want it all caps, or you want it to be the capital P, capital S? What would you prefer?
All caps, please.
Okay, so all caps, Primal Shift, 20% off. You go to eatpluck.com to get the discount, and I'll email you the stuff for the show notes. But
cool.
You can find more information about Pluck at Eat Pluck. That's our handle on socials, and my personal one is Chef James Berry. But truly, Michael, thank you for just being a team player, and just for your camaraderie. We met at conferences, and
Yeah.
every time I see you, it's such a joy. And really just respect everything that you're doing. And particularly, I love learning how you're raising your kids and what you and your wife are choosing to do. I just really honor you for that. It's not easy. So
Appreciate that. No,
really,
it's not.
really excited for you guys.
Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. Cool. Well, with that, we can wrap it up. Hopefully, we'll all see and hear you in the next episode.
Imagine you're out for a walk, breathing in fresh air, feeling great. But what if the way you're breathing is holding you back? In the next episode, we dive into how breath retention holds can unlock better fitness, mental clarity, and resilience, all without taking extra time out of your day. We'll break down how something as simple as holding your breath can boost your CO2 tolerance and transform your performance. Trust us, you'll never think about breathing the same way again. Don't miss it.